Coming up, he's the latest recipient of Forbes 30 Under 30 Award. Victor Lopez-Carmen is here in our studio. Plus, we'll learn more about an initiative on indigenous foods. I'm Mark Trahant. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from Indian Country Today.
Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. The meeting between Canada's Indian residential school survivors and Pope Francis is being postponed. The reason is the rise of the Omicron variant worldwide. In a joint statement from the Canadian Nations and the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops, it said it would be best to reschedule the event for 2022. The meeting had been set for the end of December in Vatican City, including an apology from the Catholic Church. The Church played a huge part in the abuse and death of thousands of Indigenous children in Canada's residential schools. The group of 30 Indigenous peoples, including Indian residential school survivors and descendants of survivors, had been set to travel to Vatican City for a personal meeting with the Pontiff. In Oregon, the first woman to be appointed as executive director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission is taking her seat at the table. In early November of this year, Aha Dikote was appointed to be the position after being part of the organization for 12 years. Dikote grew up on the Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington. She says she spent her time hunting and fishing with her family and learned about the importance of Indigenous first foods. To read more about this story, go to our website at indiancountrytoday.com and search for the headline, Treaty Rights Organization Welcomes First Woman Executive Director. Electric vehicles and charging stations are coming to the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Thanks to a $6 million federal grant, the nation will soon operate several electric vehicle and install charging stations on tribal lands. Standing Rock Sage Development Authority is sharing the grant with the nonprofit Native Sun Community Power Development. The organization will bring e-vehicles and charging stations to Standing Rock and the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. The idea is to create a charging network of tribal territories. Sage General Manager Joseph McNeil says kids in Standing Rock do not see a lot of electric vehicles, but he's hoping to change that.
This isn't not in their world, our children's world. I think that exposure and seeing something in your community that belongs to your tribe makes a difference in what you believe is real and what you believe is achievable, and to push beyond that.
McNeil says they are currently looking at electric vehicles and charging network and will begin construction toward the end of 2022. Several tribes have charging stations operating now at their casinos or resorts. Netflix and Illuminative are launching a virtual program to support Indigenous creators. Announced this week, the Illuminative Producers Program will give 7 Indigenous producers the opportunity to develop a film or TV project. The producers will also attend training and workshops and networking events and will receive creative feedback and mentorship through the program. Each fellow will also receive a $25,000 grant to fund their project. To qualify, applicants must identify as Native, be attached to a producer or a current project with rights to the intellectual property that they intend to adapt. Illuminative founder Crystal Echohawk says the program grew out of a decades-long fight to make space for Native people to tell our own stories.
There's a lot of different factors that have really converged to finally put pressure on the industry to say, enough is enough. You can no longer tell Native stories without us. You can no longer erase Native people. So I think that that's really important to know, that everybody's just been, organizing, working away together to kind of make this happen. And it really broke open.
The fellowship begins in April and applications are due February 21st. At least 5 Native runners will compete at this year's National Junior Olympic Cross Country Meet on Saturday. 6 runners from New Mexico will travel to Paris, Kentucky to represent their families and communities at the meet hosted by U.S. Track and Field. The runners are part of a team called NB3 Fit, hosted by Nota Begue's NB3 Foundation. Marcus Tenario from San Felipe Pueblo is one of the runners competing. He said he is running for his community.
Really want to get out there. I want to see how it is since this COVID came, and that kind of slowed me down. So my people were telling me to run all this COVID away, to help my community get healthier. So that's how I feel in my heart.
At 12 years old, Marcus ran his last 3K race at the New Mexico State Finals meet with an average time of 6 minutes and 51 seconds per mile. The team has been practicing 3 times a week and participating in mock races in other local running groups. And those are the headlines for Indian Country Today. I'm Mark Trahant. Coming up, Victor Lopez-Carmen is blazing a modern-day trail for natives in medicine. We'll learn more. Plus, we'll hear about changes coming at the Department of Agriculture and how it could impact Native communities. Victor Lopez-Carmen is a third-year medical student at Harvard University. He's wishing to bring health equity to Native communities. Major media company Forbes recognized his work earlier this month by selecting him as a recipient of its 30 Under 30 award under its healthcare category. I sat down with Victor to learn more about his work that brought his recognition. Welcome to Phoenix, Victor.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be with Indian Country Today. I grew up reading it and really proud of everything Indian Country Today is doing, and just really ecstatic to be here today with you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, tell me about your work as co-chair of the UN Global Indigenous Youth Caucus.
Yeah, so when I was in my first year of undergrad, I was in Ithaca College, and it was away from my community. So I was trying to find a way to connect back with Indigenous peoples, with Indigenous rights, and I was about 3 hours away from New York City. So I started going to New York City and getting involved in the Indigenous rights movement within the UN system. And then when I went to the UN for the first time, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, I met the Youth Caucus there. And I just started getting more and more involved, and eventually was elected co-chair.
What's so extraordinary about your generation is that because of social media, you can be connected to people all over the world all the time. Mm-hmm. How does that inform your work with the UN?
It's amazing because before the UN, I was aware, of my tribes, of Indigenous peoples here in the US, but I didn't understand the magnitude of, the global magnitude of Indigenous rights and the Indigenous rights movement in, all these different countries, over 90 countries that Indigenous peoples live in. And I think having social media, being able to connect and stay connected with other Indigenous youth around the world, I think really helped us to be cohesive throughout the year.
Did you find issues that are in common?
Yeah, I think we have more in common than we do not in common. Obviously with colonization all around the world, but I think particularly with Indigenous youth, one thing that I've heard very strongly over the years is that how important our languages are and passing those languages on. And I think it's been a struggle in many different Indigenous communities all across the world.
What led you to medicine?
Well, when I was younger, I found out I had a passion for science. I was in the 7th grade, and I suffered a pretty extreme accident where my leg got burned. And prior to that, my interests were mainly in athletics. But because I could no longer like go to practice and could no longer walk around and cause trouble with my friends, I had to find something else to do. So in the 7th grade, I started getting involved in like an after-school science club. And I realized how much I love science. They had us build rockets. They had us, figure out how a marble can move through a tube without, any engine, just using physics and using momentum. And I just realized how much I love it. And then I also grew up seeing a lot of the health disparities in our communities firsthand, and just being a witness to the issues that my people were facing, and the root causes for those as well, the systemic root causes that still plague our communities today. And so those two passions kind of melded into wanting to go into medicine and become a health professional.
When you talk to young people, and I know you have a program that actually works on that area, how do you say this is a profession for you?
Well, I think medicine's really huge, and I think a lot of people think of doctors, but there's so many ways to be a healer. And I think that a lot of Indigenous youth really resonate with that, because we have healing in our own communities. A lot of Indigenous youth grow up hearing how important health is for our people, and the many different facets of that, whether it be mental, physical, spiritual. So I think, as an Indigenous youth, what I would say to them who's interested in health is, that's amazing. You can keep following that in many different directions, and whether it leads you to being a doctor, a nurse, working in a hospital, wanting to learn more about traditional healing, wanting to do language revitalization. I think there's so many different routes Indigenous youth can take who are interested in promoting the health of their people. So that really, I think, is what I would emphasize.
When you, both in your studies and as you practice, do you see parallels between traditional healing and Western medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, and I've read articles, I think in Indian Country Today as well, that so many what people think as modern day treatments for sicknesses were actually invented by Indigenous peoples. Like there's so many, including the syringe, I think I read, and different plants and herbs that we've been using that have now been, commodified and made into very marketable drugs that, rack in millions and millions of dollars. I know that a significant amount of cancer treatments come from traditional plants and traditional medicines used in the Amazon rainforest by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. So I think, when people think of medicine, oftentimes they split traditional and modern, but I think many times, our medicine is true science, it's medicine. And we've contributed to the field of medicine in really tremendous ways. But at the same time, we do have our traditional medicine as well that, is sometimes different, but I think it's equally valid. And we need to start emphasizing in the medical field, particularly, that traditional medicines are very important and a very important aspect of health in Indigenous communities.
Well, one way it seems that would be great to translate into a broader discussion is that the view of the whole person rather than just one thing that's wrong with them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I know that Indigenous peoples definitely are, I think, an expert in that regard, and the medical field should be, taking some tips from Indigenous peoples on how to look at the whole person.
I want to ask you about the program you co-created to encourage more people into medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's named after one of my great-grandfathers, Ohiesa, Dr. Charles Eastman. He was a Dakota physician and really remarkable, contributed a lot to the field of medicine. And he was the first Native American man to become a physician. And we wanted to create a program that kind of, in the spirit of what he did, and try to get more Indigenous youth an opportunity, especially from tribal colleges and community colleges, to access this field and to try to get some experience in hospitals.
And just as an aside, I don't want to go here, but it was worth mentioning that one of the reasons you're precise when you say man is that the first physician was a woman.
Exactly, yeah, which is incredible as well.
It really is remarkable. What kind of practice do you want to do
Well, yeah, pediatrician. I know I want to work with kids. I think, going in, I didn't really know what I was wanting to do, but as a medical student, I think they work you pretty hard, and you realize like what sort of thing really wakes you up in the morning. Like, do you want to wake up at 5 a.m. for surgery? Are you happy waking up for that? And I found that, waking up at like 6 a.m., 5 a.m. to go take care of kids in the hospital, that really got me out of bed. And I realized, I really love working with kids, working with babies, working with adolescents too. And I see that there's a lot of potential in that field, especially to impact the health of Indigenous peoples, working with Indigenous youth. So I see myself being some sort, maybe just a general pediatrician, but I could specialize in like pediatric cardiology or pediatric emergency medicine. And I'm looking forward to working with Native kids. I think that's what gets me really excited.
I want to ask you about medical education during COVID, but first, since you kind of raised it, I want to ask a little more precision. What are the challenges, and I think about the economic challenges of medical school?
Well, the economic challenges, I think, for Indigenous peoples, I think, on average, Indigenous peoples are poor because of systemic issues. So to be able to access medical school, for instance, is particularly difficult. For example, even to submit an application to medical school. Usually each application costs about at least $40, and then they expect you to go out and fly to each medical school to interview. And while there are some programs to help, I don't think it covers every Native American youth who wants to go into medicine. And there are inherent privileges that I think other people have, that they're able to pay for those things, pay for tutoring, pay for MCAT books. And there's all of these little hurdles that I think can get in the way. But there's also, as a medical student, I think more medical schools recognizing these systemic disparities and finding tangible ways to financially support Indigenous youth is really important because of that.
Well, and the reason I asked is when you mentioned pediatrician is that because of the amount of debt that people leave medical school with, often they don't have the choice of general practice because they need those specialties to pay their bills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's really hard. I've heard that from a few of my classmates. I think that's why some people go into surgery and aren't going into these primary care fields. And you're exactly right. Yeah.
I want to ask you about what it's like during the time of COVID.
As a medical student? Well, when it first began, I think it was interesting to be at Harvard Medical School, where there was a lot of national leaders working with like the government or the president to try to respond to the virus in the beginning. And they sent us home as medical students around March of that year. And I think medical education, it's been pretty unique at this time because at first a lot of it was virtual. But on the positive side, I got to be with family while being a medical student and following that dream. And it was really nice to be able to go back home, spend time with my godson, and kind of see family at the same time, while distancing, obviously from my elders and doing it in a safe way. Definitely presented new challenges to, being a medical student, which is already hard.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Victor.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And best wishes on the challenges ahead.
Thank you.
When we come back, a look at Indigenous foods and how the Agriculture Department is promoting them. The Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, announced an Indigenous Food Sovereignty initiative at the White House Tribal Nations Summit. ICT reporter Carina Dominguez covered this news, and she joins us now to give us some details. Welcome, Carina.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us about this new initiative by the Agriculture Department.
Well, what's going on there is basically a pilot program. There's going to be about 8 different tribes who are involved with this. They're going to be able to actually source their own foods. So Currently, the way it works through the food program is they have to go through the USDA to get their food. And so a lot of these manufacturers have to be able to, push out hundreds and hundreds of meals. So there's a lot of processed foods in there, as you could imagine. I'm sure thousands of meals. So, now that they're giving this power, it's buying power directly to the tribe, they can choose who they're sourcing from. They can support local indigenous food systems.
Well, in a way, it's kind of funny because you think about the history and virtually every community having jokes about commodity foods and what that means. And this is a chance to revisit that whole episode.
Right. It's a time to reclaim that, and really booster, all these indigenous food producers that there are. There's a lot of good things that they got going on there. They have a partnership with the sous chef as well that is kind of connected to that. So they'll be producing some videos with him. So there's definitely a lot more to come. So we'll be, keeping tabs on that.
I understand one of the parts of this program involves seeds. How does that work?
Yes, so they want to support seed banks, and they want to give more power back to indigenous communities so they can say, exactly how these things should be done. Every culture is very different. Everyone's got different beliefs on how seeds should be stored. So the USDA really wants to support that. So they're really trying to infuse a lot of cash in that area. So they're partnering with a couple local organizations, some prominent ones, the Seed Savers Indigenous Network. I believe I'm getting that right. But so they'll also be supporting a couple of regional hubs as well. So they'll be able to process seeds and do the seed banking locally.
One other aspect of this initiative is to focus on co-management and stewardship of lands. What did they say about that?
Yeah, they had, a really great idea to partner with the Forest Service, and they want to give power back to indigenous people. So I'm not sure to what extent that's going to look like. So I know a lot of people are eager to see how that rolls out. But at this point, excuse me, at this point, I think, what they're really trying to do is offer, tribes more space to allow co-management to happen. So yeah, we'll see how exciting, a lot of people have been wanting this for a long time.
And the Interior Department is the nation's largest landowner, but agriculture is not far behind. The U.S. Forest Service and other lands are managed by Department of Agriculture. So it could be pretty significant in terms of amount of land involved.
Yeah, there's millions of acres involved. And a lot of these acres, these national park services, these Forest Service areas, they're, borderlands with tribes, tribal nations. So there's a lot of opportunity there for them to, really put this, into exercise.
Well, is any of the discussion on how foods are being changed by climate change?
Not so much. We didn't talk about that too much, but, obviously climate change is a huge issue, and they're definitely going to be looking into that. And I think, when you look at indigenous food systems and you want to support those on that local level, I think that does a lot to combat climate change, right? Because you're empowering these local food systems rather than these monocultures that, oftentimes are in desert regions like here in Arizona, and they take most of the water when we're talking about, this drought and Lake Mead. So those are really important questions to address with the USDA.
If you think about regional foods, it means eating differently as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is consumer education a part of this?
Yeah, I think they're always, looking to educate people. And I think that's part of that partnership with the sous chef that they'll have going on, Chef, Sherman. So I think that will be a huge part of their education initiatives.
What are some of the other initiatives involved?
Yeah, they have, a tribal nations hall as well. So there's a lot of, beautiful artwork on display in there. They've got, a lot going on as far as, looking at these local food systems and trying to, incorporate those. I saw some photos that they had shared with us the Secretary of Vilsack kind of walking through and looking at some of these items. So it's just really exciting, to see them actually going back to Indigenous knowledge. And, you feel like there's a level of respect there, where we're actually trying to work together. And I think the most exciting thing about those announcements was, the co-management of those, federal lands. So it'll be really exciting to see where things go from here.
We have less than a minute left, and I don't want to end this without talking about the farmers. What are they saying about this whole initiative?
Yeah, so Kara Boyd is with the American Indian Association of Farmers, and there's a lot that she has to say about some federal lawsuits going on right now. So they're definitely keeping a close eye on that across several states right now. White farmers are claiming that the American Rescue Plan funding that was intended to help, Indigenous farmers, because obviously everyone's suffering with the pandemic, but on top of that, they've been facing centuries worth of discrimination. So she's, very upset with this lawsuit. She wants to free up these funds. So keeping a close eye on that, specifically, Florida and Texas.
Carina Dominguez, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you can read Carina's story on our website, IndianCountryToday.com. Search for the headline, USDA Protecting Empowering Indigenous Foodways. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. For all the latest news, go to IndianCountryToday.com. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.